Every year, millions of people get closer to wild animals than they should. Sometimes it ends with a great photo. Sometimes it ends with a ranger writing up an incident report. And sometimes it ends much worse than that. The cases in today's episode involve tourists who ignored warning signs, crossed safety barriers, and approached animals that were never meant to be approached, and paid for it with serious injury or their lives. 7 cases. 7 moments where the animal behaved exactly as it was always going to. Case 1. The Open Window. Catherine Chappell had spent years working on some of the most technically demanding films in Hollywood. As a visual effects editor, she'd helped build entire worlds on screen. Fantasy landscapes, impossible creatures, things that looked real but weren't. In her personal life, she was drawn to the real thing. She volunteered for conservation projects and had a genuine passion for wildlife. On June 1, 2015, she was in South Africa at a lion park near Johannesburg, doing what she loved. Lion Park offered self-drive tours, vehicles moving through enclosures where lions roamed. The rules were posted clearly at the entrance and on signs throughout the park. Windows must remain closed at all times while inside the predator enclosures. Not as a suggestion, as an absolute requirement, enforced by every guide, printed on every map. The lions in those enclosures were not domesticated. They were large predators that had simply learned to tolerate vehicles. Catherine was in the passenger seat. She had her window down to get better photos. A lioness approached the car, not at a run, quietly, the way big cats move when they're curious or opportunistic. She came up alongside the passenger side, reared up, and thrust her head and shoulders through the open window. Her jaws closed around Catherine's neck and shoulder area. The guide, who was driving, tried physically to pull the lioness off. He suffered serious injuries to his arm in the attempt. He couldn't get her free. Catherine died at the scene from catastrophic neck wounds and massive blood loss. The story went around the world within hours. Every outlet used the same framing. Conservation volunteer, someone who cared deeply about animals, killed because she had the window down for a photograph. The park faced intense public criticism for the closeness of the enclosures, for the history of similar incidents, for a culture that marketed proximity to lions as a selling point. There were calls to euthanize the lioness. Wildlife organizations argued against it, pointing out the animal had done nothing wrong. What the coverage consistently noted, and what the park's own management acknowledged, was that the window rule existed precisely because this had happened before in similar parks, under similar circumstances, not as a theoretical risk, as a documented one. Catherine knew the rules. She had the window down anyway, for a few seconds, for a closer shot. The lioness moved through the gap in less time than it takes to react. The park's history made the aftermath particularly painful. There had been prior incidents at Lion Park and similar facilities. Warnings, near misses, cases where guides had intervened in time. The commercial model of a self-drive lion enclosure was itself built on a tension that no signage fully resolves. The appeal is proximity. The safety rule demands distance. Most of the time, the tension holds. Catherine's case is what happens when it doesn't. She was, by every account, someone who understood wild animals better than most tourists. That understanding didn't change what a lioness does when a gap presents itself. Case 2. The Bear on the Road. The photos were still on Omar Farangzin's phone when they found his body. Omar was 48 years old, from Italy, touring Romania's Carpathian Mountains on his motorbike in July 2025. The mountain roads through that region are spectacular, forested, winding, remote, and they're also known for roadside bears. Brown bears in the Carpathians have become accustomed to vehicles stopping, to tourists getting out, and in some areas, to being fed. Romanian authorities had put up signs, issued repeated public warnings, and made feeding the bears illegal. None of it had fully worked, because every year tourists stopped and fed them anyway, and the bears kept coming back to the roadside because of it. Omar stopped multiple times to take close-range photos with bears. The photos showed him near a female and her cubs, the specific combination that wildlife authorities warn about most explicitly, because a mother bear with cubs is not merely defensive. She is categorically dangerous to anything she perceives as a threat to them. On one of his subsequent stops, the bear charged. She seized him, dragged him approximately 60 meters down a steep gully off the side of the road, out of sight of the roadway. When authorities found him, the injuries were severe. Extensive bite and claw wounds across his torso and limbs, the kind of damage a large predator inflicts when it isn't warning, it's attacking. Officials described what they found in careful language that nonetheless conveyed the extent of it. The photos from earlier in the day became the before images in every news story. Omar standing near the bear, Omar smiling, the cubs in the background. The story circulated widely in the days that followed, attached to the phrase "selfie with bear" in almost every headline, as though the category explained the man. What it actually illustrated, for the wildlife authorities who'd spent years trying to prevent exactly this, was the gap between how tourists perceive roadside bears, habituated, calm, essentially tame, and what those animals remain, regardless of how often they've accepted food from a car window. Romanian officials used the coverage to renew their warnings. They threatened fines. The bears were still on the road the following week. The Carpathian bear situation is a specific kind of problem. Romania has one of the highest concentrations of brown bears in Europe, and decades of roadside feeding by tourists have conditioned many of them to associate vehicles and humans with food. An animal that associates people with food is not a tame animal, it's a dangerous one with reduced fear. Omar's photos showed a bear comfortable enough with human presence to stand nearby. What they didn't show was the calculation happening behind those eyes. Whether the thing in front of her was a food source, a threat to her cubs, or something to be removed from the immediate area, the distinction matters entirely to the bear and not at all to the person in the way. Case 3. The walrus and the pool. In May 2016, at the Yashanko Wildlife Zoo in Liaoning Province, China, a male visitor stood at the edge of the walrus pool to take selfies. The walrus was directly behind him. He was filming it, turning to check the angle, performing the familiar choreography of a good wildlife photo. What made the shot seem achievable was that the zoo's own staff had been doing it for years, posing with the walrus, leaning over the pool edge, treating a 1-ton marine mammal like a cooperative colleague. The culture of the place had made it feel safe. The walrus surged out of the water, wrapped its front flippers around the man, and pulled him in. The keeper on duty jumped into the pool to help. What followed, and what was later described by witnesses and in subsequent reporting, was not a single violent event, but a sustained one. The walrus held both men, pulling them under, releasing them briefly, pulling them down again. A walrus's physical strength, its ability to control movement in water, and its weight make it essentially impossible to fight off in its own environment. Both men drowned. The deaths triggered significant public anger in China about zoos and wildlife parks that allowed, even encouraged, close physical interaction with dangerous animals as a commercial draw. The walrus had not been aggressive in the ordinary sense. It had not been provoked. It appeared to treat the humans in the water as objects to play with, which, from an animal of that size and strength, produces the same outcome as malice. Critics pointed to the absence of proper barriers between visitors and the pool, The lack of any emergency protocol capable of handling a situation in which a large marine animal had hold of two people, and the years-long practice of blurring the line between a wild animal and a photo prop. The zoo promised improved safety measures. The animal had done what walruses do when something enters their space. The humans entered voluntarily. What happened in that pool in Liaoning was, in a specific sense, the product of a performance that had been running safely for years. The walrus had been in these interactions hundreds of times, and nothing bad had happened. That track record was the problem. It created a set of expectations among the staff, the visitors, and possibly the animal about what those moments meant. The walrus that killed two men on an afternoon in May 2016 was the same walrus that had been photographed with staff and visitors for years. Nothing had changed except the outcome. Case 4. The Trek That Turned. Gareth Crowe had booked the kind of activity that appears in every Thailand travel brochure. He was 36, from Scotland, on holiday on Koh Samui with his partner and his 16-year-old daughter in February 2016. Elephant trekking. Tourists seated in metal chairs strapped to an elephant's back, moving through a forested path, is one of the most popular paid experiences in Southeast Asia. Millions of people do it every year. It feels safe because the operator is there, the mahout is there, the elephant is there every day, and the chairs are bolted on. On February 1st, during the trek, the mahout climbed down from his position on the elephant's neck to take photos of the family. It was a common practice, a bit of extra service, the classic shot of tourists high up on an elephant's back, something to take home. He stepped off to get the angle. Nobody remained in the control position. The elephant, 13 years old, became agitated. It turned on the handler and then on the riders. It threw people off its back. Gareth was thrown to the ground and then gored. One of the animal's tusks drove into his abdomen and chest area. He was trampled. He died from massive internal injuries. His daughter survived. Animal welfare organizations had been raising the alarm about trekking elephants for years before this incident. The animals used in these operations are typically trained through methods that cause chronic stress, overworked, underrested, managed through fear rather than genuine conditioning. A stressed animal is an unpredictable one. The mahout's decision to abandon the control position, even briefly, even just to take a photograph, removed the one mechanism that kept the situation manageable. Gareth's death was widely covered internationally and became a centerpiece of PETA's campaign to discourage elephant trekking entirely. Local authorities investigated the operator. No major criminal prosecution followed. The broader industry continued, though awareness of its risks, for animals and tourists alike, grew significantly in the years after. What makes this case distinct from the others in this episode is the role of the mahout's decision. He didn't malfunction. He did something extra, stepped away from his position to take a better photograph for the family he was guiding. The irony is almost too neat. The moment that led to Gareth's death was a gesture of hospitality, a small extra service. The photograph the mahout was trying to take became the last thing the family remembered from that day in the forest. Case 5. The Charge at Kafue. The video was already circulating online before most people had heard the name of the park. On March 30th, 2024, 6 tourists were on a morning game drive in Kafue National Park in Zambia, in an open game viewer vehicle with a guide. They stopped to watch a bull elephant at what the guide assessed as a reasonable distance. It's a judgment call that experienced guides make dozens of times a day. How close is too close? Which animal is displaying agitation versus curiosity? When to hold and when to move? The elephant charged. The footage that later spread widely shows the guide reversing, the vehicle unable to clear the distance in time, and the elephant making contact. The impact flipped the vehicle. An 80-year-old American woman, unnamed in most reports at the family's request, was crushed by the overturned vehicle, by the animal's weight, by the combination of both. She died from massive, blunt force trauma. Wilderness Safaris, the operator, released a statement describing it as an unpredictable attack by an aggressive bull elephant. Safari operators and wildlife experts spent the following days debating the footage, whether the guide had misjudged the bull's mood, whether the escape route was adequate, whether the distance had ever been truly safe. Some defended the guide's decisions as reasonable, given what the situation looked like in the moment. Others pointed to standard protocol, maintaining clear escape routes, reading stress indicators in bull elephants, erring on the side of distance when in any doubt. What the video made viscerally clear to the millions who watched it online was something that safari marketing tends to soften. An open vehicle in a national park is not a controlled environment. The animals are not managed. The distances are judgments. A bull elephant in musth or in an agitated state is one of the most dangerous animals on Earth. And no combination of experience and protocol makes a collision survivable. The woman was 80 years old. She had come to Kafue to see elephants in the wild. She did. Case 6. The giraffe on the road. Roland Keller was driving a rental car through Kruger National Park in South Africa on November 10, 2019. He was a Swiss tourist, self-driving on the park's public roads, one of the great, accessible wildlife experiences that Kruger offers, where anyone with a valid permit can move through the reserve at their own pace. Kruger has speed limits. It has extensive signage about wildlife on roads. It has a well-understood culture among regular visitors. Drive slowly, leave a margin, expect animals at any moment. The roads run through open bush, and large animals cross them constantly. A giraffe stepped onto the road ahead. A separate minibus, carrying 13 tourists, struck the animal. The collision launched the giraffe into the air. A multi-ton animal, the tallest in the world, came down directly onto Roland's oncoming car. The roof collapsed. The windshield went. He sustained catastrophic head and chest injuries from the impact and the collapsing metal above him. He was airlifted to hospital. He died from his injuries. South African national parks launched an investigation, focusing on whether the minibus driver had been speeding or inattentive. At legal speeds, a collision with a giraffe on a Kruger road is still a severe accident. At excess speed, it becomes something else. No final determination was publicly reported, but the case was widely described afterward as a freak accident, a collision that couldn't have been predicted precisely because a giraffe doesn't announce itself before it steps onto a road. Roland did nothing wrong. He wasn't chasing a photograph or ignoring a warning. He was in his lane on a park road when a giraffe fell on him. That's what makes this one sit differently from the others. It isn't a story about a decision. It's a story about what a game park actually is when you take out the romanticized framing. A place where multi-ton animals move freely and roads run through it, and the margin for error is always smaller than it looks. Roland's death is the case in this episode that most resists the comfortable lesson. Every other story has a point at which a different choice would have produced a different outcome. Someone kept a window open, climbed a fence, fed a bear, left an elephant without a handler. Roland drove at legal speed on a park road and was in the wrong place when a giraffe was struck and fell. No rule he could have followed would have helped. No warning he could have heeded would have applied. That's the thing the brochures don't say. Case 7. The statue that wasn't. The sign on the enclosure at Kabug Island Mangrove and Wetlands Park in Zamboanga, Sibugay, in the Philippines, was straightforward. Chain-link fence, clear boundary, a crocodile inside. On 28 April 2024, a 29-year-old male tourist approached the enclosure and looked at the animal. The crocodile wasn't moving. It lay still, the way saltwater crocodiles often do, motionless for hours, so still that they can look exactly like a model. He decided it was fake. A statue, a prop, something the park had placed there for atmosphere. He wanted a photo with it. He climbed over the chain-link fence and walked up to the animal. People around him shouted for him to come back. He ignored them. The crocodile exploded off the ground. The burst of acceleration a large crocodile produces from a standing start is one of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom over a short distance. It lunged and clamped onto his arm. It dragged him toward the water and began the motion of a death roll, the rotation saltwater crocodiles use to tear tissue and disorient prey. He was pulled back out before it completed the process. He survived, with deep lacerations that required dozens of stitches and left him at serious risk of permanent damage to the arm. The video of the incident spread online immediately, generating the predictable mix of horror and dark humor. The park was criticized for fence height and supervision. But the fence had been crossed deliberately over the objections of bystanders by someone who had reasoned his way into believing that a living crocodile was decorative. The animal was motionless because that's how crocodiles wait. It moved when something came within range because that's what crocodiles do. Neither of those facts required any knowledge beyond what is generally known about crocodiles. He is the only person in this episode who went home. He left with fewer functioning tendons than he arrived with, and a story he'll be telling for the rest of his life. 7 encounters. A lioness through a car window, a walrus in a pool, a bull elephant in open bush, a giraffe on a road, a trekking elephant with no handler on its neck, a bear on a mountain road, a crocodile that a man decided was made of plastic. What connects them isn't cruelty or bad luck. It's the same misread in 7 different settings. That proximity to a wild animal is controllable, that a fence or a rule or a good photo angle makes it safe. It doesn't. The animals in every one of these cases behaved exactly as their biology required. The question is why we keep believing otherwise. What do you think? Has tourism with wild animals gone too far? Or is the risk something people should be allowed to take for themselves? Tell us in the comments. If today's episode made you think, please hit like and subscribe. It helps this channel more than you know. We'll see you next time. Stay careful out there.